Morning, Carol. Shell, how are you doing?
I am getting better, thank you.
That is good to hear. You look good.
I took the that new antiviral
Mm-hmm.
drugs, and it did a good job.
Oh, I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, it's
Hi,
called.
Charlotte. Hi, Gary.
How are you?
Yeah,
Good. How's everybody doing?
Rabbi, on
Yes.
the internet, I'm trying to learn more about what I have here. And I saw that this session is on from 10 to 12. Is that true?
Well, we're on from 10 to, I mean, our class is 10 to 11, but
That's right.
sometimes, well, not sometimes, generally, when we set a meeting time, we set it for longer in case it runs later, because we
Oh,
don't want to get cut off. So that's, like our services might be down from, 9:30 to 11, even though they run from 10 to 12. Sorry, they may run from 9:30 to 1, even though they run from 10 to 12, just to make sure we don't get cut off.
Okay, so it's correct.
Yes. Mhm.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hi, Ricky.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone.
good
Good
morning.
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 How are you feeling, Sheldon, how are you feeling?
A lot better, thank you.
Did you have the vaccine before you?
I had 4 doses of it,
Wow.
and I still caught it. This caught me off guard. I don't know where I got it,
Mm,
and then simultaneously, my brother-in-law caught it, and my sister-in-law caught it. And their stuff, they went to Florida to Disney, and they got there and did like 3 days out of 7, and they had a quarantine. And Disney, I don't know if I'm assuming you haven't been there in a long time,
right, long time. Yeah,
but they have now these bands you wear, these magic bands for the Magic Kingdoms and all that stuff.
yeah.
Now they have the ability to lock you out of the theme park. So once you tell them that you have COVID, you can't get in. So they were locked out and they had to quarantine in their rooms. They can't even fly home yet, so they're renting a car and driving home,
Oh,
Oh,
my.
God.
which
What a horror.
added expense.
Yes.
Yeah, no one seems to know. And these days, very often when people get it, it's like,
Well,
from where?
this one that I caught is the newest, the BA2 or BA4, whatever it is. It's definitely upper respiratory. It makes your throat feel like someone's cutting it with a knife.
Ouch.
Oh, God.
Yeah, it's absolutely horrible. And I sound nasal,
You
I've been
do a little bit. Yeah.
coughing, and I had a fever the first day, but it was minor and went away. And I told Rabbi Charlie that I was on the new antiviral medication, and not too many pharmacies have. The one here in our area, CVS in Rockaway carries it.
Yeah.
It's called Paxlovid. It's made by Pfizer, and it's a 5-day regimen of pills you take twice a day. So
Hi, Stan.
to do the job.
Yeah.
We got home late Monday night.
Oh,
our
welcome
train-
back.
Yeah, we are back,
I know you're leaving soon, so,
but not without some adventure, unfortunately. 3/4 of an hour after we left Sanford on the train, we ran over a man sleeping on the track,
Boy,
God.
and we were there for 5 hours
Hey,
waiting
That's terrible.
for the county officials to do their stuff. So we got home nearly midnight Monday night. So we've been catching up ever since and getting ready to leave again on Saturday.
yeah.
And we did manage to, before we left Florida, we did manage to get our 4th shot.
Good.
And
I hope your trip out west is lacking any drama whatsoever and is
likewise,
safe for everybody involved.
Where are you going?
we're
Gary?
We are going to the Los Angeles area first for a week, and then staying on to do some touring down to San Diego and back up to Yosemite before coming back home on June 2nd.
Yeah, stay away from Laguna Beach area.
Well, we're not beach people anyway, but I know it's more than just the beach there.
No, but you saw what happened, I'm sure, in the news today.
I didn't see the news yet.
Yeah, these mega mansion homes all up in flames, wild.
Oh, goodness.
Oh,
Yeah.
Oh, that's terrible.
I mean, huge homes up in the hills that are devastated, totally destroyed.
ugh.
The wildfires are, having lived in San Francisco and, being in California, you learn wildfires are absolutely horrible.
Yeah.
Now, I'm experienced with disasters, having had the flood of '72 and Hurricane Agnes went up and down the East Coast and flooded our community. So I know all about floods, but you feel an earthquake in San Francisco, you hear about mudslides and the wildfires. California is beautiful, but I'm glad I don't live there.
Yeah.
Yes, you wonder what
But
people do.
Yeah.
Well, I have a cousin who lives in Irvine, and we will visit with them at the beginning of the trip.
Irvine's not near the coast, so that's good.
Oh,
Yeah. The great fear is to have an earthquake, and some things that weren't near the coast will suddenly become near the coast. So it's a little frightening.
yeah, the oceanfront real estate in Arizona.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was the plot of the first Superman movie. So talking about happy topics, as I mentioned, there are just so many things in the news, but it's not the whole issue with returning or possibly returning the JCPOA has been kind of under the radar a bit because of so many other things that are in the news. I don't want to pretend that the wave of terror in Israel is not horrible. I don't want to pretend that the stuff with BDS at Harvard is not deeply concerning and upsetting. And just in general, some of the things that are happening on campuses. Sometimes it's not nearly as bad as the media portrays it, and other times it's just pretty terrible. But we do have to understand what's going on with this nuclear agreement with Iran. And I mean, who knows if a new one will be signed, because every other week they've got a different story. And the question is, would it be a good thing? It's one thing to discuss it from a perspective as Americans. We could have a different timeline or understanding of the timeline. But for Israel, it's an existential question. So it's very, very worrisome. So any reactions? I included two articles from Michael Doran, who is definitely far to the right. I don't know, far to the right, he's definitely to the right. One from Haaretz, the editorial, which is, they're very much to the left. And then what I felt were a more balanced presentation. But what were some of the reactions? What are some of the things that you've been reading or feeling about this? Because this also touches upon, how we feel about American foreign policy. It's not just about Israel. Carol?
I just have a question, which maybe these articles answered, I don't know for sure. But who decides which countries get to be allowed a nuclear, bomb or whatever? Is it the UN Security Council? And what do they base it on? Like, is the United States on a list that it's okay for the United States to have it or for Britain to have it, but not, I don't know if Israel's on the list or if there is a list, I don't know.
Well, there are treaties. To answer your question, I'm not 100% sure. I imagine the UN Security Council has a lot to say about it. The different countries in the world have a lot to say about it. I think that, sometimes who's allowed to have it depends on who develops it. I think, no one told America, no, you can't have the atom bomb.
Right.
We felt we needed it because Germany was working on it. And then, of course, Russia, do you remember the old Tom Lehrer song?
Yes.
Yeah, first we got the bomb, but that's good because we believe in peace and brotherhood. And then Russia got the bomb, but that's okay. The balance of power is maintained that way. Who's next? Then, and it goes through different things, like China got the bomb, but have no fears, they won't wipe us out for at least 5 years. France got the bomb, but whatever it is, because they're on our side, I believe, and it just keeps going. We'll try and stay serene and calm when Alabama gets the bomb. Israel is not a signatory to one of the major atomic treaties, partially because Israel has not, I don't think it's officially acknowledged that it has the bomb. I mean, we know that Israel has the bomb, but they have never acknowledged it. And I remember way back in the early 70s, Moshe Dayan was speaking in Wilkes-Barre, and someone asked him, does Israel have the bomb? And he said, obviously I can't reveal any secrets. Israel will not be the first to introduce nuclear weapons into the Middle East. That's what he said. But so, I think it's really the will of the world. How much are people willing to step up? Israel took action against Iraq. They didn't ask anyone, they just did it.
And
Israel
Syria.
and Syria, yeah. And they've not been shy about having plans for attacking Iran. They absolutely have plans. The problem, however, is that for Israel to carry it out, it's not like going into Syria or Iraq. First of all, it's further away. Second of all, they have much more robust air defenses. There's the whole question of what route do you take to get there? Who do you fly over? Who will let you fly over them? Then it's not just the bombers, but there's a whole slew of support aircraft, fueling planes, fighters to accompany them, AWAC type planes for surveillance planes. So it requires an enormous amount. And then in Iran, the facilities are not in just one place. Iraq was easy. You bombed Osiris, that was it. You bombed the place in Syria, that was it. But in Iran, they're in multiple places. And we know of one that is firmly embedded inside a mountain, because Iran, wanted protection against bombing. And the question is that, we can hit all these other places, but how much will that affect things? What are they doing where? And Israel, and when you think about the bombs you need for this, they're big, they're heavy, and a plane can only carry so many. And you have to have redundancy in case you miss. And then if you want, we talk about the bunker buster bombs, these huge bombs that America has developed. Well, one, America wouldn't sell them to Israel or to anybody else for that matter. And two, Israel didn't necessarily want them, because for a plane to take off with an exceedingly large bomb, you need space. And Israel's airfields are not necessarily that long. And they would have to build entirely new airfields to launch those planes. And again, even with the bunker busters, you don't know how much damage you're really going to cause or how much you're really going to slow things down. So it's enormously, enormously complex for Israel to bomb. They have the plans, and I'm sure they're, obviously they know more about it than I do. But back in, and I was still in Canada because I got a copy of the article from one of my congregants who was a big muckety-muck in the security world internationally. And he sent me an article where an Iran analyst, not from Iran, United States, you may remember Tony Cordesman, he was constantly on ABC News during the first Gulf War. He said, it will take a good part of the Israeli Air Force just to bomb the facilities in Iran, which, can Israel afford that? Can they really, how effective is it going to be? So I mean, one of the reasons that Israel and Saudi Arabia and other countries want America involved is America has the technology to project power in ways that Israel does not. I mean, America has aircraft carriers. America has submarines with cruise missiles. So, and even some of our bombers, during the Iraq War, during the first and second Gulf War, some of our bombers were launched from the Midwest. They just refueled in the air, and the stealth bombers. So, there are things that the American military can do that nobody else can do. Not even Israel, which, as we know, they're pretty competent.
But like China isn't on a list that says you can't develop a nuclear weapon.
Well, no, because China already developed it. France, Britain, United States, Russia, India, Pakistan. They all have nuclear weapons, perhaps North Korea.
So if you have it, you're allowed to have it. And that's what I don't get. I mean,
Well,
they're allowed to develop it, not allowed to develop it. And if there is some kind of a list that says who's allowed and what basis they use for determining certain countries, can't have this.
well, I think that many in the world will do everything they can to prevent countries from going nuclear. So, but at a certain point, short of military action, what can we do? There are things that can be done diplomatically. There are things that can be done economically. And depending on the country, to take military action is not so easy. Who has the right to take that military action? If China feels that Japan is developing a nuclear weapon, do they have a right to just attack Japan? America would say no.
China might say otherwise.
Yeah, China would definitely say otherwise. That's why we have, a NATO defense pact. But, it's hard. I think that who's allowed to have it depends, again, on who develops it or how much the world is willing to prevent any given country. Even though China is one of the signatories on the JCPOA, on the agreement, they're also working with Iran and, to supply them with missile technology, to supply them with nuclear technology. And, what can we do against China to prevent them from doing it? That's why the whole thing is just so frightening and so disturbing. And why for Israel, they don't want Iran to get anywhere near the threshold. I think one of the articles mentioned that at some point America is willing to let Iran get to the threshold, where it would just be a few months breakout time till they had a weaponized version. But, you know, Israel really can't take that chance. So, you know, they want to stop it as soon as possible in any way possible.
Okay.
And America and Israel have worked on this in the past. They've worked on this together. The problem has been, I think, correctly pointed out, even though Michael Doran might be to the right, I think he's correct that that changed under Obama. And the question now is, what's going on and who has the voice in the current administration? You know, what is Biden really doing?
He's doing nothing.
Well, that's certainly what it seems to be.
He's anti-Israel, and he's got a press secretary who's very anti-Israel, and it's bad news for us, and we should not be voting for
Well,
him. But
One-
let me not get into that.
yeah, because I would say that looking over Biden's history, he has certainly not been anti-Israel.
he's
And
sure
thank
it's not.
God the press secretary doesn't determine foreign policy. The question is, again, who are the different people making the decisions? How much influence do they have? And that's true in every single administration. So, I mean, I think it was a little bit more disturbing. And again, you know, how do you read some of these things from Michael Doran? Certainly, this is all, you know, they all hate Israel. And, you know, that's, given the world, that's certainly a possibility. And I wouldn't discount that. Unfortunately, I think there's also a possibility that there's just a lot of wishful thinking and a lot of naivete. That, you know, people, one of the articles talked about, or it may have been the second one by Doran, that America, the people of America, you know, are much more willing to look at realpolitik. And you know, some of the people in the State Department, which, by the way, has been historically somewhat anti-Semitic, you know, many people in the State Department either are, you know, continue to be anti-Semitic or are just, you know, they're living in this fantasy. And I'm afraid that this is, you know, again, I don't know what was in Obama's mind, but and I spoke about this once in a sermon, that one of the problems is that he believed that everybody wants what he believes. That, you know, they want people to say, oh, let's just find a compromise that we can both live with, and then we can sit around the campfire with their arms around each other and sing Kumbaya. Now, the reality is, not everybody believes that way. Iran is a great example, and why, you know, I have to include, you know, it's crucial to read all the perspectives, because, you know, Iran can say we're not interested in nuclear weapon. Except, you know, if one knows Iran, that's hard to believe. If one takes a look at some of the things that Iran has done, hard to believe. So that's why it's such a crucial issue to go back to some type of agreement. You know, I think for many, if not most in the Jewish community, the agreement was bad. There's a question whether leaving it was the right thing to do. because as one of the articles pointed out, we lost a lot of supervision. We lost a lot of leverage. It wasn't perfect. And again, it wasn't a good agreement to begin with, but we lost a lot when we just pulled out. And it may be hard to get back even to that level of supervision and that oversight that, again, far from perfect, but at least provided something. And again, that's been an argument among Israeli generals and security people. There were many security people that said, you know, it's not a good agreement, but it's better than none. I'm not sure. I think the jury is still out on that one, but you know that the Israelis.
That Tablet magazine article also make it sort of unclear as what is actually going to happen in the administration. Blinken and Sullivan and
Malley.
yeah, Malley, they're just told everybody's confused as who's doing who has more power than the other person, basically. And
Yeah.
it's confusing.
Yeah,
And the Iranian negotiator claimed all the sanctions are going to be going away.
Right. You know,
Who do you believe? Yeah.
well, that's the other problem here is, you know, who is saying what they want certain people to hear.
Right.
You know, the Iranians are going to say, oh, yes, America wants to remove the sanctions and, you know, we're really going to cooperate and everything else. Whereas for many of us, like, yeah, who's going to believe Iran? And I think part of our frustration is the seeming chaos with our foreign policy. You know, you can be pro-Biden, you can be anti-Biden, but you have to be blind not to notice that there have been a lot of questions about what America has done in different situations, or there's been a lack of clarity about what America is trying to do. So, you know, even ignoring any malicious desires on the part of certain people, you know, things can work out pretty poorly just because there is no clear, unambiguous path that anyone is following.
Well, the articles, well, two of the articles suggest that the path is actually very clear. That the idea is to just let Iran dominate the Middle East, and by whatever means, and have everybody acknowledge Iran as the Middle East superpower, and then the United States will not get involved. And the United States has done, according to the article, and certainly from what we can observe, has basically been implementing that plan. It delisted the Houthis from being terrorists. It did nothing to help Saudi Arabia from the attacks on the oil fields. There were some hijackings in the Persian Gulf that the United States didn't do very much about. There were some missile attacks by Iran or Houthis, and
Yeah.
Again, we did nothing. So the idea is that I think the plan, the idea, which I think comes from the Obama administration, it's continuing in Biden administration is get out of the Middle East. We can't do anything to fix it. That's their thought. And let everybody come to an accommodation with Iran. And once they do that, they'll be happy and peaceful. Well, Richard Nixon said the same thing about China. All we have to do is make them rich, and then they'll be good people again.
And we know how well that worked.
I've got a
Exactly.
bridge for sale.
Until there's a regime change.
Right.
And
And and actually there, Obama was pretty passive when there was that green revolution in Iran, and there were
Right.
people, and he barely even acknowledged it. Like, okay, he may not be able to send weapons, but at least in the press make a point of saying, this regime does not represent the people of Iran, which is probably true.
Yeah, but he did absolutely nothing verbally or otherwise to help that revolution, and it was squashed. And he, I don't think Obama was a friend of Israel, and he may have thought he was doing something for world peace by his grand plan, but I don't think he was a particular friend of Israel.
Well, certainly in what he was trying to do, and his overall perspective, again, even if there's no maliciousness there, it was just a colossal naivete. I had high hopes. I actually was very happy when he went and made his speech in Cairo. I figured that here is a president who can do that in a way that other presidents couldn't. And he really did push everybody up against the wall. It angered me and many Israelis when he kind of implied that, Israel exists because of the Shoah. That was already a big mistake. But he thought that, through his beautiful words that people would change, and they didn't. And when they didn't, he did nothing. I think one of the critiques that Doran makes in one of the articles is when Obama said, these are our red lines, and then he erased them and stepped back in Syria. That, I think there are many of us at the time who felt that that was just plain wrong. But, it could, that's why I included these articles by Doran, both the earlier one before the Biden was elected and the other one that just came out in tablet, because they're really, you'll have to wonder. And although Biden is not Obama, yes, he was his vice president, I don't know how much they saw eye to eye on absolutely everything. But there's enough chaos in the State Department, in American foreign policy, that who knows what's really going on. And that should be very frightening for us. Because I think, even if someone isn't anti-Israel, their inaction or their mistakes could cause serious problems. And, even in the first agreement, what a lot of people were upset about was that it didn't also deal with Iran's malicious activities in terms of developing ballistic missiles, in terms of its sponsorship of terror and sowing chaos throughout the Middle East. It didn't address any of those issues. that, it's one thing to talk about them building a bomb, but Iran is a malicious actor in the Middle East. So even this notion, we'll just acknowledge them as the superpower in the Middle East, that is, it's crazy. And it's also, it's got to be very upsetting for Americans, not just Jews, but, this is Iran of the revolution. This is Iran that held American hostages for over a year. This is Iran that has sponsored terrorist groups that have attacked and killed Americans. So, and Stan, as you mentioned, even the attacks in the American base, trying to, you'd think that it would be Muvan Me'elav, like totally self-explanatory, that Iran is not a country to be trusted, or you can really negotiate with. And actually, in terms of Israeli politics, though, there are, like I said, many security officials who are comfortable with any agreement that, that's a step in the right direction. I would say the editorial in Haaretz was not totally correct when they said it's not really an existential issue. It is an existential issue, and people on both the right and the left in Israel are concerned about Iran.
Yeah, I knew that Haaretz is not a right-wing advocate, but it seems to be running from the real problem in that article.
Yeah.
I mean, Iran is really right at this point is just a very short step away from having a nuclear weapon. They have reached almost the purity of uranium that they need, and they're quite capable of doing that in very short order, no matter what the agreement says.
And unfortunately, I don't think that Netanyahu was the best advocate for Israel, certainly under Obama. But, he did counter, to some of the things that Obama was saying, and that's still in the minds of people. Obama was saying, the choice is either an agreement or war.
It was never that.
It was never that, and that's something that Netanyahu was 100% correct on.
Yeah.
He said the choice is not between the agreement or war. The choice is between the agreement or a better agreement. It was just. Now, as one of the articles pointed out, some of the Israeli political and security positions are that work on the nuclear agreement, the issue about Iran's sponsorship of terrorist organizations and the problems it causes around the Middle East, they say they can handle that on the ground. Just take care of the nuclear stuff. And certainly Israel has not shied away from taking the steps it felt were necessary, from assassinating Iranian scientists to causing all kinds of problems for Iran. And, America certainly has not been as critical. Sometimes we have to realize that America is always going to express some criticism. This is, in terms of when something goes on in the territories, when there's construction in the territories, America is always going to object to that. They have since '67. That's nothing new. And sometimes, they make their, statement, we're concerned about the rise of violence. They make these statements that are not of real political import. But, that there are a lot of mistaken notions. One, just understanding the threat of Iran, for Israel and the Gulf nations, that it is an existential threat. They live with it day to day. And it's not just the right wing, but the left wing always puts things in, it's either this or that. No, it's not. And I mean, that's, again, concerned here in America, who is, where is American policy coming from? What's driving American policy? And, we, looking at Iran and the nuclear agreement, it's more than scary. Any other comments about any of the articles or?
I have just a general question, which I don't know the answer to. The original Obama pushed agreement that they tried to get through, how does that differ with the current one?
I don't think anyone knows for sure. And that's part of the concern for the Israelis. We didn't think the first one was so good.
Right.
Will the second one be worse? There's still a concern about how long the agreement holds. There are concerns about the length in the first one. What about
wasn't
now?
it
Are they going to?
15 years or something?
Yeah,
like that,
and
I remember.
are they going to just grandfather that in? So now it'll only be 7 years, 9 years, whatever.
Right.
Or are they going to extend it? So, and that's it. You hear different things from different people. Americans will say one thing, the Iranians will say another thing, and one American will say one thing, and one Iranian will say one thing, and somebody else from Iran and America will say something different. And there's definitely concern in Israel that the second agreement will be worse.
I mean, worst case scenario, if Iran had the bomb, would Iran throw the bomb on Israel? Because of nuclear fallout, it could wipe out Iran also, because of the distances.
I'm not so sure that an Iranian nuke would necessarily threaten Iran. It certainly wouldn't do much for any of the Muslims or Arabs living near Israel.
Right.
There's always the question, will a given country use its nukes?
Right.
Even now, when Putin kind of threatens using them, would he really use them? But that's also part of Israel's caginess, because, don't admit you have them, would you use them? And there is fear that to stop an Iranian nuke, Israel would launch one at Iran.
Yeah.
Especially at that one, Kudro, I think is the name of the mountain where they're embedded. I think, why people don't use nuclear weapons is because they're horrible.
Right.
and you can't totally control them.
Right.
So that even there's question about hitting nuclear facilities in Iran, because do you know exactly what they're doing there, what the security protocol, or what the safety protocols are, where they are along in the process, because you don't want to just bomb a nuclear facility and then end up spreading nuclear radiation across the area.
Right.
So that's also a concern that Israel or America or anyone would have in hitting somebody's nuclear facilities.
Well, the, the many rockets of Hezbollah and Hamas have occasionally been pushed towards Dimona.
Yeah.
And that's certainly on a target list of that the Iranians have.
Yeah. I mean, Israel and Iran already have missiles that can hit each other.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, even the other element of Israel striking Iran is what is the response?
Exactly.
Iran can still do plenty of damage. And even Iran doesn't have to do anything between Hezbollah and Hamas. We got a lot of rockets and things trained on Israel. And as good as Iron Dome is, one of the things they learned is that if you overwhelm it, it's not going to be as effective. So if you've got missiles coming from the north, as well as coming from the east, it's a lot harder to block all of them at the same time.
Right.
And, not to mention, if you attack Iran, what terrorist activities are let out of the bag. They are probably the ones responsible for that horrible bombing in Argentina a number of years ago.
Right.
And they could do a lot of bad things all over the place, whether it's against Americans, against Israelis, against the Gulf states. Now that the Gulf states have a number of them have made peace with Israel, I'm sure for the Iranians, they're fair game. And again, it's underestimating the Iranians and their perspectives. And it's the same with the terrorists. We have to deal with Hamas or Islamic Jihad or even the PLO. They don't want the same things that we want. They're not really interested in peace. Now, the people, the Palestinian people probably have very different perspectives than their leaders. I mean, the Palestinian people seem to think that the Abraham Accords were very good. But the leadership of the Palestinian Authority and Hamas most certainly didn't. They totally opposed it.
I think they opposed it because it came from the United States. Period.
Yeah, from the United States. And also, it's just a reminder that the Arab states do not particularly love the Palestinians. They never have.
Yeah.
So, for
Otherwise,
example,
they'd have taken them over a long time ago. They would have
Right.
let them in.
they were not allowed citizenship in most Arab countries because the Arab countries wanted to use them as some kind of pawn. And part of the sad fact of the people in Sheikh Jarrah is they had been displaced when Israel during the war of they left at the time of the Independence War, but then when Jordan ended up controlling that territory, they moved them back in. Or they moved the Arabs, but they moved into Sheikh Jarrah with the understanding that they would no longer be considered refugees. They were Jordanians. They were not Palestinian refugees. And we think of the horrible Munich massacre at the Olympics, but what was the name of the group that carried that out? Black September.
Sure.
And where does the name Black September come from? The brutal repression of the Palestinians by Jordan. People have questioned whether or not Egypt's peace treaty with Israel kind of screwed the Palestinians, and to some extent it did, because Egypt got the entire Sinai. They didn't get Gaza. probably because they didn't want Gaza. And when the Palestinians supported Saddam Hussein, the Arab world really, really was not happy with that, because Saddam Hussein attacked an Arab country, attacked fellow Muslims, and they, there was a strong, strong reaction against the Palestinians. They were thrown out of a number of countries.
Lebanon, I remember.
Yeah. And, at this point, I think that for many of the Arab countries is, for the Gulf states, we've been feeding you with a lot of money. We've been trying to support you, but what are you doing? All you're doing is sending rockets into Israel, and then they fire back. Why are you surprised at that? I mean, if you follow the various rocket attacks, the various conflicts between Hamas and Israel, for the first few days, or even the first week of the fighting, there was not necessarily a lot of comment from the Arab world, because well, what do you expect? It's only when civilian casualties mount that they could come in and say, oh, this is terrible, yada, yada, yada. But, I think that many in the Arab world are just fed up with the Palestinians. Israel did offer you a very generous plan. They've been willing to negotiate. And you constantly refuse to negotiate. You constantly fall back on terrorism. And how much longer can we keep supporting this? We're missing out. And I think that's, I don't think we should underestimate the power and the importance of the Abraham Accords, because that will make contacts between Arabs and Jews on a much more personal, direct basis. That will probably have a far greater effect on peace than, people sitting around the negotiating table when suddenly people are talking to each other. And, and even now, the wave of terror is not exactly opening up Israel to behaving more sympathetically toward the Palestinians. Interestingly, and why I am continually praying for this current government, I think they have taken a lot of steps to, as we say, reduce or shrink the occupation. Again, notion based on Michael Goodman's book, Malkot 76, Catch 67. I've mentioned that book many times, where he says, right now we're not in a shape to negotiate, but there are ways of minimizing the effect of Israeli power over the Palestinians. And they've done that. They've opened up the borders many times. They've increased permits. They're, even though Naftali Bennett, who is definitely on the right wing, is currently the prime minister, they have taken steps to reduce some of the pressure on the Palestinians. But when they respond with vicious attacks, this is not just a suicide bomber, which is gruesome and horrible in its own way, but this is a very personal, direct attack when somebody is stabbing someone, when someone's using an axe. And that they've encouraged kids to do it, teenagers. That. So, we may want to do everything we can to bring peace between the Palestinians and the Israelis, but, at some point, you can't escape the fact that Israel doesn't necessarily have a partner. And certainly America, in dealing with Iran, and you know, look at the relationship. I mean, one of the articles had a picture of Putin, yeah, Putin, Xi Jinping, and the former Iranian president Hassan Rouhani. You know, the three of them together. What does that say? What does that picture say? And I agree with the notion of trying to work through diplomacy. And it's much better to have dialogue with the Iranians than to be shooting missiles at each other. But, you know, do we have to go into this type of agreement if we are entering into agreement? Do we have to enter into negotiations for an agreement from a position of weakness or from an assumption that we have to tolerate some outrageous behaviors from the other side? And it's a very frightening situation. And again, I think it's frightening for us as Americans because we haven't seen a lot of successes on the diplomatic front for our country. We can love Biden, we can hate Biden, but you know, what's happening?
Only negotiate if somebody's on the other side talking with you.
Or speaking the same language. Yeah, I find it hard to believe that the Iranians are speaking or ever were speaking the same language. But, you know, until we're serious about encouraging regime change, which I know is not an easy thing to do and not, you know, you can't just take out ads in the paper. Anyone who's interested in regime change and, you know, please call the American government. Now, you know, I don't think that's, but, and, you know, as Jews, you know, we're concerned about anti-Semitism in the world, anti-Semitism in this country. We're concerned about BDS, whose primary role is to foment anti-Semitism, you know, but, you know, Iran is still a threat on the horizon. And one that, you know, Israel has to watch very, very carefully. And you know, we hope that we would return to a time when Israel and America did work together. And I think on many levels, you know, the American military and the Israeli military are, you know, they're quite close. But, you know, there has to be more communication and more discussions, because we need to have more influence. Any other comments on the articles or anything else you've read or heard recently? I do have a question to ask. Obviously, this was not the week for it, but would you like to meet in person?
Where?
Not necessarily at Panera's. You know, I could put up coffee at the synagogue. Unless
Well,
people are willing to meet at Panera's, but I think that,
either.
Yeah, I'd rather not meet at Panera's.
pardon me?
I'd rather not meet at Panera's. I
Okay.
think at the synagogue, it would be a little bit easier.
Yeah, certainly in our social hall, we don't have to worry about ventilation and
Distancing.
It's not just
distancing.
that, Panera's, sometimes it's hard to hear, you
Right.
know, that kind of
Yes.
stuff. The
Yeah,
temper-
at Panera, it's difficult to hear a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, unless you can get a special room, it's just, it's
Yeah.
not great for a discussion.
Yeah.
So next month, we'll meet in person at the synagogue.
Sure.
God willing, everyone will be healthy. Gary, you may even be back.
But let's see, we're going to be back June 2nd. So yeah, we'll be back.
Yeah,
in
you'll
time for
be
that.
back.
What day is that? That's,
June 9th.
oh, yeah, we'll still be away, hopefully,
Okay.
but that's okay.
Yeah, did I put it in my calendar? Let me just check here. Yeah, I think it's
Yeah,
the 9th.
I won't be here then.
Oh, wait a minute.
But that's okay. Don't
No,
change
but we
it.
have 2 people who won't be here.
Yeah, but
I mean,
there
not that
may be
I'm,
more.
I'm still
There
happy
may
to meet
be
with
more.
whoever's here.
Yeah, I mean, there may be more because it's in person. You may get
That's true. That's true. We may get,
you may get the Lefkowitzes that
yeah,
usually come, and Charlotte may definitely come, and who else that usually comes? And there may be some others that have shown up at Panera.
yeah, I think that's a good point.
Marlene comes sometimes.
Mhm.
Who was that?
Marlene.
Marlene,
Marlene, right?
Bob Bayless.
Bayless.
So,
Susan Levant, I remember came.
yes.
Horowitz,
Who?
David
Did David
Horowitz.
come?
David Horowitz? No.
I don't remember David coming. Who else? Alan Spivak occasionally would
Alan
come.
Yes.
Spivak, yeah, right.
You know, I mean, he would mostly come because his wife dragged him, but yeah, he came afterwards a few times. You know, he's he may still want to do that.
Yeah, it's worthwhile trying.
Okay, so we'll
So
still do it June 9th, 10 a.m. at the synagogue.
Okay,
Okay,
good.
well, everyone be well. Shell, feel better.
Thank you.
Welcome back, Gary. Have a safe trip and uneventful but fun trip out
Yes,
west.
hopefully.
And again, tomorrow, Parshat HaShavua at noon, 6:30 services, online at 10 o'clock, in person and online. And Havdalah this week is 9:15. And don't forget the congregational meeting on the 17th in person. So have a good day, everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you, you too.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Take care.